The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the vast Marian army assembled at the banks of the Daya River. Tens of thousands of soldiers stood in disciplined formations, their polished spears glinting like fireflies in the dimming light. War elephants, adorned in golden armor, shifted restlessly, their deep rumbles merging with the distant thunder of war drums. To the center of it all, Emperor Ashoka sat astride his great war elephant, clad in gleaming armor, his sharp eyes fixed on the distant walls of Kalinga, the last unconquered kingdom in his vast empire. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of the river, but beneath it lurked the stench of impending bloodshed. Kalinga refuses to bow, General Virasena said, standing beside him. They will fight to the last man. Ashoka's lips curled into a faint smirk. He relished resistance. It made conquest all the more satisfying. His father, Emperor Bindusara, had expanded the Mauryan Empire, but Ashoka would be the one to immortalize it. He had spent years crushing rebellions, executing rivals, and ensuring his dominance. Now, Kalinga stood as the final obstacle in his path. Then we shall grant them their wish, Ashoka said, his voice as cold as steel. He raised his sword high. The war drums roared. The battle had begun. The siege of Kalinga, the Mauryan forces descended like a storm upon the battlefield. Arrows darkened the sky, spears clashed, and the ground trembled under the weight of charging war elephants. Ashoka, ever the warrior, fought at the front lines, his sword cutting through enemies with ruthless precision. Cries of the dying filled the air. The riverbanks ran red. Kalinga's warriors fought fiercely, their loyalty unwavering, but they were no match for Ashoka's relentless military machine. Hours passed. By dusk, Kalinga was no more. Fires raged through the city. Corpses lay in heaps, the once thriving kingdom reduced to ashes. The few survivors, mostly women and children, huddled among the ruins, their faces twisted with grief and terror. Ashoka dismounted his elephant, surveying the destruction. The sight was one he had seen countless times before. Victory. And yet, something felt different. A small movement caught his eye. Amidst the wreckage, a child, no older than 6, clutched the lifeless body of his mother. His tiny hand shook as he stared up at the emperor, not with fear, but with hollow, unblinking sorrow. Ashoka felt something stir in his chest, a feeling foreign to him. For the first time in his life, the weight of conquest pressed upon his soul, but he turned away. "We march at dawn," he commanded, stepping over the bodies. The wind carried the faint cries of the orphaned child, trailing behind him like a ghost. Night fell over Kalinga, but Ashoka found no rest. He sat alone in his grand war tent, the golden embroidery of his canopy swaying with the wind. A silver lamp flickered beside him, casting long shadows across the silk-draped walls. The celebration outside, his generals drinking and boasting of their victory, felt distant. Hollowed, he reached for his wine but stopped. The battlefield clung to his mind like a curse. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw them. The corpses stacked like fallen leaves. The wailing mothers. The orphan child clutching his dead mother. Their cries were not drowned by the clang of swords anymore. They screamed within his soul. Ashoka, the ruthless conqueror who had once bathed in the glory of war, now sat in silence, his hands trembling. Why did this battle feel different? The walk through hell at dawn, he donned a simple robe and, without his royal guards, walked through the ruins of Kalinga. The air was thick with the stench of death. Crows feasted on bodies left unclaimed. The wounded moaned, their voices hoarse with suffering. He paused before an elderly woman cradling the lifeless body of her son. Her thin fingers stroked his blood-stained face, rocking him as if he were still a child. She looked up at Ashoka, not with fear, nor with hatred, but with a sorrow that shattered him. "Are you happy now, Emperor?" she whispered. Something inside him cracked. He staggered back, his vision blurring. Her words struck deeper than any blade ever had. His entire life had been built upon conquest, dominance, and bloodshed. And for what? Had he truly won, or had he lost his own soul? The monk's wisdom that evening Desperate for clarity, he sent for Upagupta, a revered Buddhist monk known for his wisdom. When the monk arrived, he found Ashoka pacing in his chamber, his hands clenched, his mind restless. "I have conquered the world," Ashoka said, his voice hollow. "Yet I have never felt emptier." Upagupta studied him for a long moment before speaking. "What weighs heavier on your heart, Emperor? The kingdoms you have taken, or the lives you have destroyed?" Ashoka's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to him this way. "Tell me, great conqueror," the monk continued, stepping closer. "If you stand atop a mountain of skulls, can you truly call it victory?" The words hit like thunder. Ashoka sank to his knees, his entire body trembling. He had believed himself invincible, but now, faced with the truth of his actions, he felt small. "What must I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The monk smiled. "Abandonva. Choose Dharma over blood. The greatest victory, Ashoka, is not over kingdoms, but over oneself." And in that moment, Ashoka knew. His path had changed forever. The empire trembled as Ashoka abandoned war. His ministers were shocked. His generals resisted. His advisors warned of rebellion. The Mauryan Empire was built on conquest, they argued. If we do not strike first, our enemies will. But Ashoka stood firm. "The bloodshed ends now," he dismissed war councils, dismantled siege engines, and ordered the stamping of new edicts, not of dominance, but of compassion, tolerance, and peace. "No more shall my sword carve sorrow into this land," he declared. "From this day forward, we shall conquer only through righteousness." A new empire, a new Ashoka. His first decree was a shock to the empire. He outlawed violence against prisoners and civilians. Instead of executing dissenters, he listened to them. Instead of ruling by fear, he ruled by dharma. Temples and hospitals rose where barracks once stood. Roads were built, not for armies, but for pilgrims and scholars. But his greatest change was within himself. One day, as Ashoka rode through a village, he saw a young boy playing near a monastery. That it was him. The orphan from Kalinga, and no longer trembling in grief, no longer a child of war, but a child of peace. Ashoka stopped. The boy looked up. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Ashoka knelt before him. "Have you found peace, child?" Ashoka asked. The boy studied him, his gaze no longer hollow, but full of something Ashoka had never seen before. "Have you, Emperor?" Ashoka smiled. For the first time in his life, he finally had. And so began the golden age of the Mauryan Empire.
The storm returned at midnight, howling through the stable rafters. Tempest paced her stall, her hoofs striking the wooden planks like a war drum. I crouched in the hayloft, nursing a whiskey bottle, its burn a poor substitute for clarity. Below, Lila's sketches fluttered in the drafts, Auntie's scarf, my hands, Tempest's wild eyes, each line an accusation. Auntie found me there. Rain streaked her face, her lavender blouse soaked to gray. Get down, she ordered. He's coming early. The bottle slipped from my grip. When? Tomorrow. Her voice cracked. Lila sent a telegram. Of course she did. The girl had vanished after the accident, leaving only a sketch tucked in Tempest's bridle, me, mid-fall, arms outstretched toward nothing. Dawn brought no respite. The fields churned with mud, the sky a sickly yellow. Auntie scrubbed Tempest's saddle, her movements frantic, while I checked the fences. Lila reappeared at noon, her hair braided tight, a leather satchel across her chest. Running away? I asked, nodding at the bag. She smirked. Just getting started. From the satchel, she pulled a sketchbook, flipping to a page stained with creek water. It depicted Auntie and me in the hayloft, our shadows tangled. Accidents happen, she said lightly. So do truths. Auntie dropped the saddle soap. What do you want? Lila's smile sharpened. Him. Tempest whinnied, a piercing sound that scattered crows from the oaks. We rode at dusk, Auntie's idea. One last gallop, she insisted, though her eyes pleaded for more. The wind whipped her scarf into a crimson banner as we reached the cliffside trail. Below, the river raged, swollen with rain. Lila followed on the old plow horse, her laughter brittle. Faster, she shouted, kicking her mount's ribs. The creature lurched forward, spraying mud. Tempest tensed beneath me, her ears flat. Easy, I murmured, but Auntie was already urging her mare into a gallop, her scarf snagging on a branch and fluttering to the ground like a wounded bird. Lila swooped down to grab it. Too slow, she taunted, waving the fabric. Stop this. Auntie reined in her horse, chest heaving. You're acting like a child. And you're acting like a wife. Lila's voice dripped venom. She spurred her horse toward the cliff's edge, the satchel bouncing against her hip. Tempest bolted after her, beyond my control. Lila, no. The girl turned, her face alight with triumph, until her horse skidded on loose gravel. The world slowed, hoofs scrabbling, rocks cascading into the void, Lila's scream swallowed by the wind. Tempest veered sharply, throwing me into the dirt as she lunged for the reins. Auntie reached them first. She leaped from her saddle, grappling Lila's waist as the horse slid backward. For a heartbeat, they hung suspended, Lila's fingers clawing at Auntie's arms. Then, with a grunt, Auntie hauled them both onto solid ground. The plow horse vanished into the mist below. Back at the stable, silence festered. Lila huddled by the hearth, the sketchbook warping in her grip. Auntie paced, her boots leaving dark prints on the stones. You could have died, I said, uselessly. Lila didn't look up. You'd have liked that. Auntie froze. Enough. She seized the sketchbook and hurled it into the fire. Flames devoured the pages, our silhouettes, Tempest's rage, Lila's hungry stares, curling into ash. You don't get to erase me, Lila whispered. Auntie knelt, gripping her shoulders. This isn't love. It's a fever, says the woman who burns her own life down for a distraction. Lila wrenched free, fleeing into the storm. Tempest stamped, her flank streaked with mud and sweat. Auntie touched my arm, her fingers trembling. When he comes, I know. She leaned in, her breath a ghost against my ear. I wish I'd never. Hoofbeats thundered outside. The hoofbeats stopped. Auntie's husband stood in the stable doorway, his suit pristine despite the storm. He carried no luggage, only a silver pocket watch glinting in his grip. His eyes, cold and flint gray, swept over the mud-streaked floor, the smoldering hearth, and finally, Auntie. She stiffened, her hand slipping from my arm. Clara, he said, voice devoid of inflection. The carriage awaits. She didn't move. Tempest snorted, her ears twitching toward Lila's abandoned satchel. Now, Auntie glanced at me, a flicker of defiance in her eyes, but only for a moment. Shoulders sagging, she untied her rain-drenched scarf and let it fall. It pulled at her feet like a surrender flag. Lila returned at dawn. I found her by the creek, shivering in yesterday's clothes, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. Pages fluttered in the wind, half-finished drawings of Tempest's Main, the cliff's edge, Auntie's scarf mid-fall. She chose him, Lila spat, though her rage faltered. She chose survival. Coward's words. She tore out a page and thrust it at me, a sketch of my face, etched with shadows I hadn't noticed before. Keep it. A relic of your great romance. When I reached for it, she yanked it back, shredding the paper into the water. The current swallowed the pieces, ink bleeding into oblivion. You'll leave? I asked. She laughed, hollow. What's here? A broken horse and a liar? Tempest nudged her shoulder, but Lila shoved her away. Stay out of it, beast. By midday, she was gone. The stable felt cavernous without them. I burned the remnants of Lila's sketches in the hearth, along with Auntie's scarf. The fibers curled and blackened, releasing the faintest trace of her perfume, jasmine and recklessness. Tempest watched, unnervingly still, as if the fire had leached the wildness from her bones. At sunset, a knock. Auntie stood in a plain gray dress, her hair tightly coiled. No sunflowers, no laughter. She held out a sealed envelope. For Lila, she said. If she ever returns. You could stay. The words tasted foolish. She stepped closer, her gaze lingering on the scorched hearth. I used to think desire was a flame, she whispered. Turns out, it's the smoke, chokes you long after the fire's dead. Before I could reply, she pressed a key into my palm, her husband's estate, miles east, and walked away. Years later, the market bustled with autumn's first chill. Tempest, now grizzled and slow, nosed my pocket for sugar cubes. A girl's laughter cut through the crowd, sharp and familiar. There, by the spice carts, Lila. Older, her hair shorter, a toddler balanced on her hip. She haggled with a vendor, her free hand gesturing wildly, *alive*, but not the same. Our eyes met. Recognition flickered, then cooled. She turned away. Tempest whinnied, low and mournful. Easy, girl, I murmured, steering her toward the road. Behind us, a scrap of yellow fabric fluttered from a cart, a sunflower-patterned scarf, unfurling in the wind. Tempest paused, ears pricked, but I nudged her onward. Some ghosts are best left chasing shadows.